We've done it again.
Backstage is the best part.
Kerry O'Shea Gorgone, there is another guest on track.
So there is comedian Doug Ouimette. And how did we met him?
He's never heard that one.
I know.
We're going to talk about a bunch of things today. We're going to talk about chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, and we're going to talk about what it's like to, get from the people saying that you're funny to actually being a stand-up comic, because there's a big distance between those two areas.
Hi, everyone. Tim Kitzer from NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, welcoming you to The Backpack Show. Your hosts, Chris Brogan, Kerry Gorgone, Boom Shakalaka.
Backpack Show.
I always like when we have local people on.
Your audio didn't come on it right away. What'd you say?
I said, I love when we have local people on, because Doug is currently based in Rhode Island.
Yeah. I just realized that this time when I watched the credits, I focused on Josh Robert Thompson, which I thought was interesting and telling, because he was a comedian on places like Craig Ferguson and whatnot. He was the voice behind
Jeff the robot.
Jeff the robot.
No, the skeleton. I can't remember. He was like both.
Like a robot skeleton?
Robot skeleton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
this is why I'm not on the show.
That was really good witty banter we did there.
Oh, shut up. I looked at B. Castro, which has no correlation whatsoever. Yeah. So I know what that means.
B. Castro, who's written one of the Aliens books now.
The one about Vasquez. Yes.
Everyone's most favorite, like a minute and 20-second character on Aliens.
Well, that's one of the things.
Bill Hicks.
One of the things she wrote. She's
Bill
written a lot. What are you doing? What are you doing over there?
I gotta go to bed and wake up again.
Let's put you back to bed, Grandpa.
Let's just try to be hosts.
No, she's written a ton of horror novels, and they're kind of steamy. So if you like your horror steamy, go get some B. Castro.
Hi, Chloe. All right, let's grab Doug. You get your finger on your button?
No,
I've got mine.
That sounded questionable at best.
You know what? I just saw Rhett say something like that on that show, Rhett and Link, Good Mythical Morning. Doug, good mythical morning to you. How are you?
I'm good. Good morning to you.
I just realized I don't even know if we should say morning, because you never know. Like, someone could be watching this at their time zone. It's late afternoon in Warsaw.
You can say good morning to Doug, because Doug is like an hour from here or something. It's morning.
Doug, one of the things that happens in the land of stand-up is, I alluded to this in the intro. There's you're funny, and there's I'm going to make a run at this and try to do this work that is super thankless, super hypercritical experience and whatnot. And you made that jump. You're a real life comedian with a real life special that you could buy on Prime and all that. What gave you the belief? Like, what led you to say, I could do this. I got this. I can make a show.
So my friends had always told me I should try stand-up comedy. But then I felt the same way you felt. Just because I can make them laugh in my basement, or just make them laugh when we're hanging out somewhere, doesn't mean I can go on stage and talk for 45 minutes to an hour, just me, and make everyone laugh every 15 seconds. So there is a big difference. And I always put it off. And then my wife got sick about 5-6 years ago. And I started to see a therapist about it, because she completely declined to very low levels. And my therapist said I needed to start talking to people about my feelings. That was never something I enjoyed doing. That was never something I was good at. So I went to work. I told my colleagues that I need to start talking about my feelings. And they recommended that I get a microphone and just talk about my feelings to people. So
at work, that would be awkward.
Yeah. Well, no, they found an open mic for comedy in this center of Rhode Island. And I actually went to that open mic, not with the intentions of just doing stand-up comedy, but let me just vent out my feelings and see how people react to it. So went there with about 5 or 6 of my co-workers, grabbed a microphone when it was my turn, went up there for 5 minutes and just talked. And in the back of the room, without me knowing, was a guy by the name of John Parada, who if you ever start to follow Rhode Island comedy, he is like the guy who books everyone when they get started in comedy. He started off with people like Bill Burr, who started out in this area. And he came up to me after I talked. I don't want to say I performed yet. And he saw a lot of potential in what I was doing. He said my timing was great. My delivery was great. Just I didn't have anything figured out with joke structure. And I'm like, well, that's because I wasn't telling jokes. I was just venting. And he kind of took me under his wing. He started booking me around Rhode Island. He taught me a lot. I took a comedy class that he ran, and that's where I started to learn the joke structure. So stand-up comedy wasn't something that I necessarily just knew how to do. You're not really born with that skill, but people that are good at it decided that they were going to take the time to teach me how to do that skill. And that's how I really started to get into it. And then John started booking me ever since, and now I'm all over New England. I've done New York, wherever I can go. Yeah.
Bill Burr said in an interview that to kill in New England is dramatically different than killing down in New York. And he's seen people do sets down in New York where he's just kind of like, oh, that was killing. Okay. Whereas he says, at least in the Boston scene, you heard rather loudly how good or how bad you were doing. Yep. There's a huge hill to climb when you go from sort of open mic to, trying to do your 5 minutes on stage. It's fascinating to me that this started out as sort of expressing your feelings, because to me, there's like two origin stories for stand-ups. It's either you loved it your whole life and you just wanted to try and you can try to scrape your way through it, or like what you said, you just sort of land there in a very strange way and kind of figure out the science of it. So you're like a craftsman version of this, it seems. Is that how you describe how you put your jokes together, or what's your process?
So I started off with a little notebook that I hand wrote in, but then I'd keep losing that notebook, and that would upset me because I would lose all my jokes. And then I just started texting myself and making notes in my phone on a Google Doc of all the different things that I go through the day and laugh at or get aggravated with or just have some type of an emotion with. And then I will sit down in my basement and start crafting all of this together. So I'll start figuring out what's the premise to what caused me to have a reaction. I try to put this joke together. The first person I run it by is my wife. And even if it's not about her, if it's about anything, I run it by her. And most of the time she'll look at me and go, why do you think that's funny? And not laugh at all. And I'm like, all right, well, that gets thrown away. And there's a lot of throwaway, but then there's things I'll say that'll get her to laugh. And then I know at that point I've got something that made me laugh. I got something that makes her laugh. Then I run it by the rest of my family. I test things out at work without telling people that it's a joke or something I'm testing. So I'll see this opportunity pop up and I'm like, oh, I've got a premise related to that. Let's see if I can make these people laugh without them knowing that they're critiquing my comedy. And I start testing it out on people unsuspectingly. And then if I can get enough people to laugh that way, I'll bring it to stage. And then I'll start seeing, does an audience laugh when they're at an actual show? Because it's weird performing in front of a comedy audience, because you've got the people who are going there to have a good time. Hopefully that's most of your audience. And then you've got people going there to prove that stand-up comedy isn't funny. And I don't understand why they spend money to go to a comedy club to prove that stand-up comedy isn't funny, but they sit there and they intentionally try to not laugh.
That's actually kind of funny.
Yeah.
And, just ironically.
There was one show I did, I'll never forget it. I get up on stage, I do my opening line, and this woman sitting right in front of me, about 5 feet away, looks at her friend and goes, oh, he's not funny. And I'm just like, I can hear you. This isn't great. And
I'm not a hologram.
I know. She didn't care. Everybody else in the room left. So I just take it as she doesn't understand what I find funny.
Or how to modulate her voice.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's how I kind of put it together. It's my real life experiences. There's nothing I talk about or make a joke about that I didn't actually experience in some level in real life. I will alter it. I will test it out as making it about different people. There's jokes that I have in my special. So I end my show with a joke about Yelp, where I put my mother-in-law on Yelp, and every time I leave her house, I get to write a review. The actual origin of that story is about like 9 or 10 years ago. We were having Thanksgiving at my mom's house, and we wanted to harass her. So me and my sisters actually put my mom on Yelp. And then we wrote an actual Yelp review about how this was a horrible restaurant because there's a dog that's running around that licks your feet. You have to do the dishes. And we wrote this 1-star review about my mom. And my mom laughs about it still. My wife loves the bit because it's so true. But I'd go on stage and say, so gave my mom 1 star, and then everyone in the audience would be like, "Oh, that's so mean." So I'm like, all right, well then I can't tell a joke if at the end the person who's getting made fun of gets all the sympathy. So then I switched it to, I made a Yelp review about my mother-in-law, and everybody laughs. So apparently mother-in-laws are fair game, but moms are off. But yeah, so every joke I have is based off of something real, but sometimes it has to get altered so the audience can feel comfortable laughing at it.
You mentioned work a couple of times, so this isn't like your primary gig.
No, I'm famous enough to still need a day job. So I am a career specialist at the University of Rhode Island. Cannot stand going to comedy.
Leslie says, I can't stand going to a comedy show and people there try to take down the comedians. So annoying.
Oh, I didn't get to the second half of the statement when it first came up. I'm like, someone here that can't stand going to comedy shows.
I mean, maybe it's one of those people showing up to say how bad comedy is.
She's just following me everywhere.
So you work...
I work at the University of Rhode Island, which is a state school, as a career education specialist, which I love because I can tell people that the state of Rhode Island uses tax dollars to pay an aspiring stand-up comedian to advise college graduates on how to responsibly pursue a career. But yeah, that's what I do for a living. But ultimately, where it starts to roll into what I'm doing now and my strategy behind what I've been doing is I have students come into my office all day long and they say, this is my goal. This is what I want to be in 5 years. And it's my job to help create a path of different tasks and different things for them to have to do in order to achieve that goal. And I've kind of taken the exact same mentality for myself to say, these are my goals. This is what I want to achieve. This is my definition of success. And I really try to lay out a blueprint for how am I going to get from where I am today to where that definition of success is for me in the future. And I love creating tangible actions. I hate people who are just like, I'm going to make it, and they can't define what it is. Or I'm going to be successful, and they can't define what success is. It's just they feel like, I'll just know it when it's here. And I don't think that you do. I think people that I've seen have taken that philosophy, every time they get to where they originally would have said success is, they move the bar and they just keep chasing it. So I try.
Won't you though? Once you hit it, Doug, aren't you going to go for the next thing?
I do, but I make sure I take a moment to celebrate the initial success. Mm-hmm. I don't just say that wasn't as hard as I initially thought it would have been. And like one of my dreams when I first started this thing was to have a special that was released on Prime Video. And not because I paid to put it there or not because I wanted a distribution company to be able to sell that special to Prime. And that's how I got it there. And
I paid to watch it.
And then audience members pay to see it, which blows my mind that people will pay money to watch it. But it's now that I've gone through the process and I see how that process was achieved, it's like learning how the magic trick is done. Is the magic trick still impressive? I try to remind myself that, yeah, the magic trick is still impressive.
So you'll have more specials. Because some people like hit the New York Times bestseller list one time and like never again. Like, is one time.
So Doug, you said that the origin story of this is your wife got sick. You needed a way to talk about it. Can we talk about that for a minute? Tell us a little bit about what's going on there. And you have to use those words because there's no way I can say that thing.
Okay.
That's the worstly named medical thing ever. You even made a bit about that in your show.
I do. My wife got sick with something that we had no idea even existed. The name for it is either chronic fatigue syndrome, which is what it's mostly referred to in America as, and then pretty much everywhere outside of the United States, it tends to be called something called myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is brutal to say. So everyone then abbreviates it to ME. So then when somebody says, "What's wrong with you?" they respond with "me." And it's the most vague way, but my wife loves the bit because it's so accurate that her entire body is essentially shutting down. So what's wrong with her? All of me. Me is what's wrong with me. It tends to be tied to being an autoimmune illness, which is literally your body attacking itself. And so yeah, the me joke lands in so many different ways for people that understand that illness. But essentially what it is for people listening that don't know what it is, chronic fatigue syndrome is not somebody who's just, I don't feel like working anymore, or my life's too hard, so I just want to sit on the couch and watch movies all day. I'm tired. That's not what it is, because that's lazy. And I tell people that's what I am. That's what makes my wife and I different. And chronic fatigue syndrome is if you're exposed to too much sound, light, or movement, your body will essentially start to shut down. You could become pretty much paralyzed. There's pictures I've posted in different spots online so people can kind of see the breakdown a little bit, but my wife will become unable to move in the house. I have to call an ambulance. The paramedics will come. They'll put her on a stretcher. And there's been a point where the only way she could answer questions was by blinking. She couldn't even get words out. She became that weak. And it's not because she did anything that strenuous. It could be, you know what, today she decided to go to the grocery store and to JCPenney. And those two things were like so ambitious. And even if she uses her wheelchair, it's still the light, it's still the sound. It's, was there a kid screaming in the middle of the grocery store? It's those types of things can destroy her. And when you start to see a woman decline like that, it's brutal. The part that's not in my comedy special or in any of my bits is who my wife was beforehand. My wife was in the event industry. So she was an event coordinator. She would travel the country putting on conferences and events, running all throughout different hotels, conference centers, doing like more steps than a nurse. And she went from that to not being able to stand up. She was the valedictorian of her hospitality program in college, and she was the third best hospitality student in the country. She's not a lazy woman. And when doctors tell her this is just in her mind because she's sick of doing her job and doesn't want to work anymore, it's crazy. I had a guy come up to me after one of my shows, actually crying, telling me that he's so appreciative of the fact that I'm raising awareness for this illness because he had it and people used to tell him that he was lazy. And I said, well, what were you before you got sick? And he was a Marine.
Oh my God.
Like, this thing takes down professional athletes. This thing takes down Marines. This thing takes down a lot of different people. So anyone who wants to help it, anyone who wants to raise awareness for it, I am all for supporting those causes.
You just swing by omf.ngo and you can give to the cause that Doug points out the most for this particular thing. That's the one that's helped out your family and others. And I think that's exciting. I have to tell you, one of my favorite bits that you did in your Amazon Prime special was that whole interaction with the doctor. Like it was, well, we did all this stuff, we did all this imaging and whatever. And when she's laying on the floor telling you this, while she's just still laying on the floor because she can't move, you did the phone and you said, oh, well, I did some imaging. That was, I think it really hits, and I bet it hits every time you do it because people have that moment of frustration with the medical professional telling them something isn't so, and as a layperson, like how could you possibly be saying this as a doctor? And the other part of that problem is that they do it far more to women than to men.
Correct.
What?
I know, Kerry. Could you believe this? Let me explain something.
Thank you so much for explaining the struggles of my people.
Yeah.
For God's sake, stop talking. Let the woman speak.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of competing things happening. So there's the fact that they give you just so much time for your appointment and they kind of don't want to go beyond it. And sometimes because they feel doctors feel pressured to like keep things moving. So if they're like, her blood work's fine, therefore she's fine. Yes, it's lazy, but I also feel like they're getting pressured. So you advocated for your wife successfully to get them to take another look, or you went to a different doctor, I assume. Yeah. And that's so important. I feel, to me, that's the lesson, is like to advocate for yourself and your loved ones, especially your loved ones when they can't, literally are on the floor and can't speak, because other people have pressures and disincentives to like keep working the problem. They'd rather it just go away.
So we have two different types of doctors. Well, three. There's the ones that actually understand this illness and start talking to you about it. But then the other two, which are much more common, there's doctors who come in like the one that's in my bit. That's like, she's fine. There's nothing wrong with her. Congratulations. And literally, like that joke, we went to the doctor. She's lying on the floor. And the doctor walks in, looks at her on the floor and tells her she's normal. But then they're like, then you have the other doctors, which we love so much more. So if there's doctors watching this, listen to this. There's other doctors who can come in and say, we ran all of the tests and we don't know what's wrong with it. So when a doctor is able to come in and admit there's something wrong with you, our tests aren't able to detect it, and we don't know the answers, that's so much more validating. That's so much more helpful than just saying you're fine because we can't figure out what the problem is. So that's something we would love for doctors to be able to learn how to do more, is just simply say, we don't know what the answer is, as opposed to saying there is no answer.
What do they do now? So if your wife has an episode like that, what do they do now?
When we take her to the ER, we have to teach the doctors. So when she has those symptoms, things that help my wife, and I also try to make a point of saying that just because it helps my wife, it's not universal for everyone with CFS. So I'm not saying that this is your cure if you have CFS, but my wife tends to get a lot of help from saline IV. And what's crazy is an ambulance can just give you saline IV the moment they pick you up. But then when you get to the ER, you have to wait until a doctor can prescribe it, because technically it's medicine. So if I drove my wife, this is all stuff we've learned over the years. If I drive my wife to the ER, she has to sit there for hours to get saline. If I call the ambulance, they'll deliver it to our house. And it's like a food truck for her that they put her in, and they just immediately start feeding her with saline IV. And then by the time she gets to the hospital, she seems normal again, because the saline helps her that much. And for my wife, what we're finding is one of the problems is it's a blood flow problem. So when you increase her blood pressure, her symptoms tend to get relieved a little bit. So when you pump your body with saline, you're increasing blood pressure, and that's why it helps.
Well, I think you're just going to have to go out and get yourself certified as an EMT, Doug. It sounds like. Leslie says, quite an illness for her and your family, and great that you can use humor as an outlet. I know how hard it is to be a caregiver. Kudos to you for being her advocate.
I just found these hooligans on your YouTube shorts. So I was just sharing them for some background.
Sugar.
It's crazy to imagine having to, that particular topic in your act. Your other stuff goes into some it's a varied collection, Doug. You talk about your shopping woes. You talk about the WWE. You talk about transgender people as you're trying to relate and connect with your nieces and nephews. So it's fascinating. You made a joke that I don't think is exactly a joke. You made a comment about the fact that like this is like rage management in some ways. Things that like drive you nuts end up being your comedy. Just heard Jerry Seinfeld say the same thing. He goes, I hate going on vacations, but thankfully for me, my act is talking about things that annoy me. So I just look at it all as material. Do you see the world like that a bit? Like, are you taking everything bad and good in as material all the time at this point?
Anything that creates a reaction, because there's something there that's breaking an expectation. So when I put together a joke, I try to set an expectation. So, and then the punchline is breaking the expectation. So if I experience something and it makes me upset or aggravated, then I must have had some expectation going into that was then broken. So then I try to analyze it that way. And then if I go somewhere and I have a better time than I thought, I get a positive reaction. There's still some expectation that wasn't met the way I thought it was going to be met. So anytime an expectation is broken, I know there's a joke in there somewhere. And it's about writing that. And you brought up the transgender jokes, and I talk about the gay community a little bit, but LGBTQ kind of comes into it. And the premise for that, because everything comes from real life, was people said, well, there's some people, I do a ton of these interviews and it always comes up, there's just some topics that you're not allowed to talk about as a comedian. And I'm like, what, illness? Because I talk about that quite a bit. I talk about that sad topic. And they're like, well, the LGBTQ community they get this stigma that they can't take a joke. And I'm like, they don't need to always be the punchline. So when I include them in my set, I intentionally try and make them not the punchline. It's the people who are viewing them in a negative light sometimes that I view as the crazy people that are like, why are you looking at them from this way? And the same thing with the transgender community. It's just shift your lens, or just ignore it, or just don't be the problem, is kind of where I try to take that lens. But I include them in the jokes. And I have, just like with the CFS community, I have a lot of people from the LGBTQ community who have written to me privately, because they also don't always feel like putting their comments out publicly. But they write to me privately, and it's been 100% positive. So they're like, I found that really funny. I love that way that you perceived this topic. And so I took that critique of comedy, tried to take that kind of a challenge and say, all right, well, why can't I talk about this topic? And how can I spin that to where I can talk about that topic?
I feel like you maybe upped the ante for yourself at work. Now when you meet people to get career advice, are they like, I thought you were going to be funny. Like, what the hell is this?
Well, I have about an hour of material on resumes alone. But when I present on resumes, cover letters, interviewing skills, all that stuff, you can definitely, people laugh during that as well. So I do actually try to make that fun and entertaining, which is why my coworkers were the ones who are like, if you can make resumes funny, if you can make cover letters funny, then maybe if you could talk about whatever you want, you can make that funny too.
Well, I mean, job applicants make resumes funny. Just kidding.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to pick a person of the day, and I don't have.
Yeah, we're going to have to move this show along, because otherwise I'm going to need your services and fill out a resume. So hang on one quick second.
Oh, and here's our person of the day. Kaboom!
I haven't seen Kate in these parts for a while, so I'm giving it to Kate. Kate, you're a person of the day. Could have given it to Leslie. I mean, she really stuck it out, and she just went through such a thing of caregiving. It is still kind of doing some caregiving. So I'm going to give it 2 persons of the day. You too, Leslie. You go.
So you can go get yourself an apple. You
right.
You will have to pay for it or steal it yourself, but the 2 of you can split it. And I suggest you bake it into a tartlet.
I realized right before this that I didn't prep Doug for our only question that we ask every guest, which is what goes in your backpack. This could be something physical, like a hammer. It could be something metaphorical, like hope for the future. Kerry, what's a good physical thing someone could add to a backpack?
Ooh, extra set of teeth. DJ Cumberbund put an extra set of teeth in the backpack, because you just never know.
DJ Cumberbund, whose favorite wrestler was Macho Man Randy Savage. And what about something metaphorical we could add?
Oh, well, burlesque performer Ariel Helvetica put kindness in the backpack. And I laughed in her face, but it was not because kindness is a funny answer.
Not her fault.
No.
Doug Ouimette, what are we going to put in the backpack today?
Oh, my backpack is going to have to be really big. The physical thing I put in it is a wheelchair, because it's good for people with CFS and for lazy people. So it works for both me and my wife. I love driving her wheelchair around. The metaphorical thing I always have in my backpack is purpose. So everything I do is going towards some purpose or some goal.
I love it. Well, I do have to say one thing, people who have watched the show for a little bit, you should pay really close attention to this part, because I just realized we changed it up. And this is, my grandmother is a bit of an artist, and so she submitted this for a new ending of the show.